Some people probably regard foreign policy as something of a magical religion, that the men who are most worthy of understanding it have been around a long time and have experience. But it bears as a cautionary note the fact that Dwight Eisenhower came to regret his association with Allen Dulles. He mistook Allen Dulles' worldliness and experience for wisdom. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but there's two sides to that. I knew a hustler who used to say, when Maxfield Parrish was around, the gargoyles of the Philadelphia underworld would gurgle through their cigars, give us some of that idealism, Maxfield. They use idealists at Pitt as a human shield and as a dartboard for hooliganism. Hooliganism takes effrontery from changes in foreign policy. You can see a naval vessel that JFK visited before his assassination, where they're clearly filming in advance the snuff plant. The kid gets hit in the back and his head flies like that. So you have hooligans commanding the idea that if you disagree with a cause, you are insulting the veterans who fell in battle. And the men on top have been described by National Security Council members as falling asleep at tables where they couldn't identify on a map who they were talking about. I don't know how bad it is. I'm not admiring Kirby, Miller, or Blinken, much less Biden. I've fallen asunder of regular readings of Foreign Policy magazine, although I found the Brookings Institute far more regular in spirit than the Bush and Clinton administrations who were out there. Hillary Clinton was going off with their heads, literally, at Joint Chiefs of Staff meetings. I've always wondered why we are so callous and casual about enlisting men in experimental warfare, unproven reasons for adversity, and risk nothing for diplomacy. Biden and Netanyahu have it mapped out in the apparatus how to respond. They've been wounded, they've lost members, they know how it feels. Doesn't change anything about the overly precious obsession with their authority as a form of doctrine that we should swear fealty to despite its obvious disrepute. So I'll go through a little of my bank of foreign policy ideas just so you understand them. I believe the point of departures are very important. For example, Martin Luther King's point of departure, which, despite the use of John Lewis these days by the House Dems while not condemning the genocide in Gaza, opposed the Vietnam War and thought Martin Luther King's Riverside Baptist Church speech of April 4th, 1967 in New York was his best speech, where he said that basically that the point of departure being offered by Ho Chi Minh is the most rational one in the field and should be embraced and squared up with. He believed that human rights and civil rights were in an interlocking framework for human futures, ecology, and public education, public access. He didn't fear poverty so much as he feared indignity. And indignity begins when you cheat another person of their dignity. And this spiritual slavery galled him far more than learning to live in circumstances that challenge you to bring out the best in yourself. Americans in those days were not shy of embracing hard work. But hard work at the destruction of the planet became an industrial mindset. War on nature was the idea behind the Industrial Revolution. War on nature is folly, it's foolishness, it's war on our species. We need to learn to live with other species. We need to learn to accept being startled by bees and butterflies so that they prosper and they fertilize our flowers on our gardens and our farms. With the invention of biological changes through science, Robert Kennedy has attempted to create a constituency for policing these new trends. The Russians also believe in working together professionally through groups like Interpol. When I say weaker point of departures, you probably think that Ho Chi Minh was the first thing on my mind because it's the first thing I mentioned. It isn't. The first thing on my mind was when the Berlin Wall came down. Never in my life have I so missed Martin Luther King. The Berlin Wall had been a haunting tragedy of the mistake that was made after World War II because FDR died too soon, of not congratulating our partners in their knockout blow against the bitterly unnameable. After the Berlin Wall came down, men we have supposedly been led wisely by, who we were supposed to trust, started talking about the ever more menacing Russia. How could they mistake the lies about expanding NATO from comments like that one? It was immature, it was amateurish, it was insufferable, but it was dependable in one way. It advertised the double cross. America has been leading the world in double crosses. We don't know who to trust because we go by our own performance as a measuring stick. I grew up among people who I believed were experienced and wise, and there's all sorts of confirmation that some of these people had role models who were experienced and wise. I don't think anything I've ever heard about the defective deficiencies of FDR have ever compromised his abilities to remedy the concerns and problems of the working man. He wanted Vichy French allies of Japan in World War II out of Vietnam, but he was subverted by the Red Scare. The Red Scare is no meaningful role model. It still is a high tide spirit that gets sort of transformed into things like anti-Muslim mania, Islamophobia, and all of these other things, because it was hot-wired into our psyches and our character as a form of role model that we dare not second guess because of the wise men in special intelligence who can't identify reasons why Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE might work with Israel in subverting the lower classes in animosity towards a future Arab Spring, who can't connect the dots. How dare Arnold Schwarzenegger talk about connecting the dots when he is like so tight with Barack Obama, whose tear gas in Egypt surmounted the forces of reform in Arab Spring. When we look at the Islamic world, we need to realize that we're deregularizing through combat a society that just wants to live. just wants a food supply, just wants their children to be safe. He wants access to private schools sometimes so that their religion is appreciated and applauded. There's nothing wrong with that. What meaningful foreign policy could possibly believe that being the only superpower in a unipolar world as an overarching goal is better than protected diversity in a mutually respectful multipolar world? Who in their right mind would argue that we should be in schools discussing and approving and enjoying our differences? Because differences doesn't mean conflict. Differences means enhancement. Do you want to live in a world where everyone is the same? Well, get ready for it. We'll summon artificial intelligence robots to dehumanize the planet, and you'll get your wish. Foreign policy requires more than anything else the ability not just to find a place on the map, but to find meaning in the index of books about the place. I don't have the answers to every question in the field of foreign intelligence, but I have books where I am familiar enough with the indexes that I can look for meaningful answers and find people who have them. It's called reference librarianship. I'm not a reference librarian, I'm just a library clerk. I'm a layman. I've laid off some of these things because, well, the idea that my injuries prove that the investigation I ran was more an investigation of myself than others, that I wasn't attacked. It's like saying that the injuries and amputations of children in Gaza proves that they're members of Hamas. I admit that I am injured and that there are problems with the idea of participating with someone who is deaf. I have graciously bowed out. Now, they have threatened me with a sort of weird omerta for even imagining love. I don't, they see me as suicidally weak and want to bait another me attack prostitute production society form that they call the Gurdjieff Cluck, who have operated more and more ferociously and openly through our civil society, branding me, earmarking me, and naming me what? What are you calling me now, Twisted Louie? Demonic. For what? For disapproving of your special intelligence nightmare of war games and fight clubs? That's not an issue of foreign policy that I can sense. That sounds like homegrown hooliganism of the sort that held home movie productions, pre-productions of the snuff of JFK when he visited aircraft carriers in the Pacific. My father was on an aircraft carrier in World War II, and I want to tell you something about an admirable human being. You may find things you don't like about him, but he did some things that were very remarkable. He wrote books in the 40s about human rights. He wrote a book called Humanizing the School that preserved the intellectual heritage of the American school system. It didn't come crashing on it with a sledgehammer, we don't need no education. He showed why people should be free to learn and enhance their knowledge base. And he was gifted in showing that it had an ethical dimension. An ethical dimension is a whole section of its book. What did he do when he retired after being emeritus and signing diplomas on his deathbed? Man, I mourn. He drove a school bus in retirement. God help Biden to be justifying the bombing of school buses. Did you see it's too exasperating to even believe sometimes. That's another reason why I signed off out of the field. Foreign Policy magazine isn't such a bad read sometimes, but I agree with the distinguished representative from Palestine. We need a no profit from war amendment to the Constitution that requires disinvestment from personal investments before a person can serve in the Senate. This dizzying profiteering over something is unmanly as genocide is bad, bad news.